Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. What's up? So I just received my Super Now tie rod ends, fresh from Japan. They still have some of that JDM aroma. I can't wait to open these up and show you guys, and Lord have mercy. Sorry guys, I'm still making new mistakes. Anyways, on to the show. Here are the Super Now tie rod ends that also correct bump steer. You'll see the two bump steer spacers on the tie rod end there. One's slightly smaller and one is slightly bigger. Sorry, I didn't measure the actual distances, but you get the picture. Okay, let's get started. Before I jack up the car and put it on jack stands, we need to break loose all 5 lug nuts. You'll have a heck of a time trying to do this with the car in the air, unless you have a friend with you who can put their foot on the brake while you break loose the lug nuts. So let's jack up the car, put it on jack stands, and please folks, put it on jack stands for your safety and anybody else helping you work on the car. Okay, and after removing the wheel, we can see our suspension assembly, and there is our tie rod end and tie rod. Forgive me for the out of focus shot. For some reason my camera focused on the ground and not the tie rod. I now remove the top nut of the tie rod end so I can remove the tie rod end itself. But there's one key difference I want to point out between the Mazdatrix tie rod ends and the Super Now tie rod ends, and that's in the middle of the tie rod end here. On the Super Now units, you see there's a hex shape so you can have a wrench around the middle of the tie rod end. This is great because you can actually hold this in place while removing the nuts. On the Mazdatrix tie rod ends, there is no hex shape in the middle, so you're relying on the other nut on the other side to hold still while you remove the top nut. However, this could create complications if you can't get the top nut loose, and you might have to get some vice grips or something to hold this thing in place. Thankfully, I didn't run into that problem, and I was able to get the top nut loose on mine and hammer this thing out. This isn't a direct apples to apples comparison. However, these products are both very similar, and Super Now also offers the same super angle kit that Mazdatrix offers. Actually, I believe the Mazdatrix kit is based off the Super Now kit. You may have noticed that the Mazdatrix tie rod ends have a lot of play in the heim joints as compared to the Super Now heim joints. I've had these Mazdatrix tie rod ends for a little over 2 years, and the car sat mostly in the garage. The wear seems to be a little premature, but perhaps being exposed to the elements has worn down the metal enough in the heim joints to create this play. Here's a quick clip of what it sounds like. These are the rack spacers of the Mazdatrix Super Angle kit. If you don't know what these are, I'll give you a quick explanation in my very simplified diagram here. So the rack spacer mounts in between the tie rod, which I have pictured here, and the rack itself. This red line sort of represents where the tie rod stops the rack travel on the rack teeth. As you can see, there's unused rack teeth, which would translate to more distance traveled by the tie rod, hence more angle. The difference between these 2 points is the extra rack stroke that you get and translates to more steering angle. I know this is a very simplified diagram, but I hope that kind of explains it for those who don't understand. The reason I'm taking these off is because I don't need that much angle. The knuckles themselves provide enough angle for my use. Another thing to take into consideration is if you're going to run rack spacers on your application, you may have to cut the end of the tie rod end so you can actually adjust for the correct amount of toe. This is necessary on the FC. In hopes to avoid the premature wear I experienced with the Mazdatrix kit, I've decided to take some generic wheel bearing grease and cover the heim joints. Hopefully this will protect them a bit from water and dust, keep it from getting within inside the joint. If I was trying to be even more sophisticated, I could try to put some heat shrink or something on top of the heim joint, shrink it to even protect it further. But this will do for now, as I don't daily drive this car. Installing the new tie rod ends is simply the reverse process of removing the Mazdatrix tie rod ends I showed earlier. So I'll skip this and jump straight to what I do to get a rough alignment. I won't tighten the nut for the tie rod all the way just yet. Here I'm measuring the distance of the threads on each side to make sure they're equal, and I'll make equal adjustments. This is because I have the steering wheel centered already before I started this job. You want to make sure that you have the wheel straight and the steering wheel centered before doing this. This way I won't have a crooked steering wheel when driving down the road to the alignment shop. I now put the wheels and tires back onto the car. From here, I'm going to measure the toe on the front and back of the tire. And I'll do this before I lower the car to the ground. I like to do this to make sure I get it within a rough range of 0 toe. Because when I put it on the ground, it gets a little harder to adjust the toe itself. Now you want to do it again on the ground because depending on your suspension setup and application, the toe will change when the wheel is compressed, when the suspension is compressed in its nominal position on the ground. Additionally, you want to have a friend help you with this part to actually hold the tape measure, as you can laugh at my struggles to try to measure in between the middle of the tire on each side. Sorry it's so out of focus, but you get the idea here. I have a reference point on the middle of the tire that's the same on each side, and I simply measure where the tire is on that point. After a lot of measuring and going back and forth adjusting the tie rod ends, making sure to adjust equally on both sides as I do, I finally get to a point where I can lower the car to the ground, and I have this thing close to 0. Don't forget, re-torque your wheels. Once back on the ground, I roll the car back and forth to let the suspension settle and remove any binding in the rubber of the tire. I now will continue adjustments with the car on the ground, using the same method I did in the air. I like doing that method in the air because the alignment could be way off, and that's a fast way for me to get it into spec. And then I do it again on the ground. But with each adjustment you make on the ground, you're going to have to roll the car afterwards to remove any binding in the tire. Unless you can come up with a way to make these frictionless plates like they do in an alignment rack, or add a lot of loose gravel and dirt that let you move the tire freely when adjusting the suspension. Now, I didn't show the removal of the tie rod itself, but if you are curious on how to remove or install the tie rod, or the rack spacers for that matter, the only special thing you'll need is a 24mm shaved down thin enough to fit in between the tie rod and the rack spacer. So that basically wraps up this tie rod end replacement. It's a pretty simple job. You can do it with just only a handful of wrenches. The hardest part may be getting the tie rod end off itself. If you have stock tie rod ends, you will most likely need a ball joint separator that will go in between the knuckle and the tie rod end so you can pry it off. Thank you for watching. If you guys need help replacing your parts, please feel free to leave a comment down below, ask any questions, or if you see any mistakes, please feel free to put some tips and suggestions. That's all. Take care. Bye.